Marcus Delacroix pushed his cleaning cart down the gleaming hallway of Pinnacle Tech, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. At 42, he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to make himself invisible. His slight frame, barely 5'8", was hidden beneath oversized janitor's coveralls that hung loose on his shoulders. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, and his graying hair was always neatly combed, but never stylish. To everyone at the bustling software company, Marcus was just another piece of the background, someone to overlook, ignore, or worse. What they didn't know was that Marcus Delacroix had spent 15 years as a Navy SEAL, completing 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. His unassuming appearance masked a man who could kill with his bare hands in 12 different ways, who had earned the Bronze Star and Purple Heart, and who had trained some of the most elite soldiers in the world, but those days were buried deep, locked away after a roadside bomb had taken his entire unit, everyone except him. Now he cleaned floors and emptied trash cans, seeking peace in the mundane routine. It was therapeutic in a way. Nobody expected anything from the quiet janitor with the soft Haitian accent. Nobody looked twice at him. Most days that's exactly how Marcus preferred it, but not everyone was content to let him fade into the background. "Hey, Haiti!" The voice cut through the quiet morning air like a knife. Marcus looked up from mopping the executive conference room to see Derek Thornton strutting down the hallway, flanked by his usual entourage. Derek was the company's head of sales, a 30-something golden boy with perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive suits, and an ego that filled every room he entered. Behind him walked his lieutenant Brad Kowalski, a thick-necked former college football player who now spent his time kissing Derek's ass and looking for someone weaker to intimidate. The third member of their trio was Stephanie Voss, a sharp-tongued marketing director who seemed to take pleasure in cutting people down with her words. "I said, 'Hey, Haiti!'" Derek repeated, his voice louder now, drawing the attention of several employees who were passing by with their morning coffees. "You deaf or just stupid?" Marcus continued mopping, his movements steady and methodical. He had heard Derek the first time. He'd been hearing Derek's casual racism and attempts at humiliation for the past 6 months, ever since he'd started working at Pinnacle Tech. "Stay calm," he told himself. "This job is peaceful. Don't let him drag you into his world." "He's ignoring you, man," Brad chuckled, cracking his knuckles. "Maybe he doesn't understand English." "Oh, I think he understands just fine," Stephanie said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Don't you, Marcus? Or do you prefer your little nickname? Derek's so creative with names." A small crowd was gathering now, other employees slowing their pace to watch the show. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, some curious, some uncomfortable, but none willing to intervene. They never intervened. Corporate hierarchy had its own rules, and janitors were at the bottom. Derek stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the bitter scent of too much coffee. "I'm talking to you, boat person. When someone important is speaking to you, you show some respect." "Breathe," Marcus told himself. "Count to 10. These people don't know what real conflict looks like. They're playing games while you've seen real war." He dipped his mop back into the bucket, wringing it out with deliberate care. "What's the matter? Can't afford to get your uniform dirty by talking to us," Brad sneered. "Maybe if you worked harder, you could afford better clothes. Or maybe learn to speak proper English." The hallway had gone quiet except for the soft whispers of onlookers. Marcus could feel the familiar tightness in his chest. Not fear, but the carefully controlled rage that he'd learned to bury deep. In another life, in another world, Derek Thornton would already be unconscious on the floor. But that Marcus was gone. This Marcus just wanted to finish his shift and go home to his small apartment, where he could feed his cat and read his books in peace. "Excuse me," Marcus said quietly, his Haitian accent more pronounced when he was stressed. "I need to finish this floor." Derek's face flushed red. Being dismissed by the janitor in front of an audience was clearly not part of his plan. "You need to learn some manners, friend. This is America. When Americans are talking to you, you stop what you're doing and pay attention." "Derek, maybe we should," started one of the watching employees, a young programmer named Sarah, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Should what?" Derek snapped, spinning toward her. "Should let the help think they can disrespect us? This is exactly what's wrong with this country. No respect for hierarchy." Marcus kept mopping, but his grip on the handle had tightened imperceptibly. "They don't know," he reminded himself. "They're civilians. They don't understand discipline or real respect. This isn't worth it." But Derek wasn't finished. "Hey!" He reached out and grabbed Marcus's shoulder, spinning him around roughly. "I said I was talking to you!" For just a moment, Derek felt the resistance in that thin shoulder, like grabbing onto solid steel. Marcus's eyes met his through the wire-rimmed glasses, and Derek caught a glimpse of something that made him step back instinctively. Something cold and dangerous that had nothing to do with mopping floors or emptying trash cans. But the moment passed. Marcus looked down, adjusted his glasses, and continued with his work. "That's better," Derek said, his confidence returning with the audience's laughter. "See? He can learn. Maybe there's hope for you yet, Haiti." As the crowd dispersed and Derek's group moved on, continuing their commentary loud enough for Marcus to hear, Sarah lingered behind. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly. He's not always like that." Marcus looked up at her. Really looked at her for the first time. She was young, maybe 25, with dark curly hair and kind eyes behind her own glasses. She was lying about Derek, and they both knew it. But she was trying to be decent, which was more than most people bothered with. "It's okay," Marcus said. "Thank you for the concern." "It's not okay," Sarah replied firmly. "But nobody wants to make waves, you know. Derek brings in a lot of money for the company." Marcus nodded. He understood exactly how these social hierarchies worked. He'd seen them in the military, in war zones, in refugee camps. Power protected power, and the rest learned to survive as best they could. But as Sarah walked away and Marcus returned to his mopping, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was building. The respectful distance he'd maintained, the careful invisibility he'd cultivated, it was starting to crack. Over the following weeks, Derek's campaign intensified. It started small, as these things always do. Accidentally, bumping into Marcus in the hallway and making him spill his cleaning supplies. Leaving messes in the bathroom specifically for Marcus to clean up, then complaining loudly that the foreign janitor wasn't doing his job properly, making jokes about boat people and island time whenever Marcus was within earshot. Brad and Stephanie enabled and amplified every incident. Brad would block Marcus's path in narrow hallways, forcing him to squeeze past while making comments about personal space and knowing your place. Stephanie would schedule fake emergencies, requiring immediate cleanup in conference rooms, then criticize Marcus's work in front of important clients. The worst part wasn't the harassment itself. Marcus had survived torture, had been shot at by people who actually wanted him dead. The worst part was watching good people look the other way. Sarah would give him sympathetic looks but never spoke up again. Other employees would quickly avert their eyes when Derek started his routine. The security guards, the receptionists, even some of the executives who witnessed Derek's behavior, all of them chose their own comfort over basic human decency. "This is why you left the military," Marcus reminded himself during particularly bad days. "People are complicated. Most of them aren't evil, just weak, and you're tired of fighting." But that reasoning was getting harder to maintain. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in November. Marcus arrived at work to find his cleaning cart overturned in the lobby, his supplies scattered across the marble floor. Standing nearby, pretending to check their phones while obviously watching for his reaction, were Derek, Brad, and Stephanie. "Oh, wow," Derek said loudly as Marcus began collecting his scattered bottles and brushes. "Looks like someone had an accident. Hey, Haiti, you might want to be more careful with company property." A group of employees was arriving for the morning shift, stepping around the mess while studiously avoiding eye contact with Marcus. He worked methodically, restoring order to his cart while Derek's group provided commentary. "Maybe he needs glasses," Stephanie suggested. "Oh wait, he already has them. Maybe he needs better ones. Maybe he needs to go back to driving school," Brad added. "Learn how to operate heavy machinery, like a mop cart." Marcus finished organizing his supplies and began mopping up the small spills from broken bottles. The chemical smell mixed with the scent of Derek's cologne was making him nauseous, or maybe that was just the rage building in his chest. "You know what I heard?" Derek said, his voice carrying across the lobby. "I heard they have a different work ethic where he's from. Island time, you know. Everything's very relaxed, very slow." "That explains so much," Stephanie laughed. "I always wondered why it takes him twice as long to clean our floor as it should." Marcus's hands were completely steady as he worked, but something inside him was changing. The careful compartmentalization he'd built, the walls between his past and present self, were developing cracks. "Remember why you're here," he told himself. "Remember what peace feels like." But then Derek crossed the line. "Hey, I've got an idea," Derek announced. "Since you're so good at making messes, Haiti, maybe you could clean up after us more often. In fact, why don't you start coming in on Saturdays? Do some extra work. Unpaid, of course. Think of it as community service." The lobby had gone very quiet. Even the employees who usually ignored these scenes were paying attention now. Derek was essentially demanding free labor, and everyone knew it. Marcus straightened slowly, his mop still in hand. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. "I work my scheduled hours, Mr. Thornton. If the company needs additional cleaning services, that would need to be arranged through my supervisor." "Your supervisor?" Derek laughed. "You mean Rodriguez?" "He works for me, friend. Everything in this building works for me, eventually, including you." That wasn't true. Derek had no authority over the cleaning staff, but truth had never been his strong suit. What mattered was the audience and the power dynamic he was establishing. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said quietly. "I'll speak with Mr. Rodriguez about the schedule." "No misunderstanding," Derek said, stepping closer. "I think you've been getting a little too comfortable here. Maybe it's time someone reminded you what your place is." He reached out and placed his hand flat on Marcus's chest, pushing him backward. It wasn't violent, not quite, but it was unmistakably aggressive. A clear challenge in front of witnesses. Marcus looked down at Derek's hand, then back up at Derek's face. For the second time, Derek caught a glimpse of something dangerous in those quiet eyes. But this time, instead of stepping back, Derek pushed harder. "Problem?" Derek asked with a smirk. Marcus removed Derek's hand from his chest with a gentle but firm grip. His fingers wrapped around Derek's wrist, and for just a moment, Derek felt the strength in those fingers, like being gripped by a machine. "No problem," Marcus said softly, releasing Derek's hand. "I'll finish the floor now." But as he turned back to his mop, Derek's humiliation boiled over. Being dismissed twice by the same person, especially in front of an audience, was more than his ego could handle. "You know what? I don't think you're understanding me," Derek said, his voice rising. "I don't think you're getting the message. Maybe we need to communicate in a language you understand better." He reached out again, this time grabbing Marcus's glasses and pulling them off his face. "There we go," Derek said, holding the glasses up like a trophy. Now you can't hide behind these things. Let's see what you really look like. The lobby was completely silent now. Even Brad and Stephanie looked uncomfortable. Derek had moved from harassment into outright assault, and everyone could see it. Marcus blinked, his vision blurry without his glasses, but his voice remained calm. "Please give those back." "I don't think so," Derek said, turning the glasses over in his hands. "I think maybe you need to earn them back. Show a little respect. Apologize for your attitude." "Derek," Sarah's voice cut through the tension. She had just arrived for work and was taking in the scene with obvious horror. "Give him his glasses back." This is too much." "Is it?" Derek asked, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "I don't think so. I think our friend here needs to learn a lesson about respect." And then, with a casual motion that would replay in Marcus's mind for hours afterward, Derek opened his hands and let the glasses fall to the marble floor. The sound of the lenses shattering echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Marcus stared down at the broken pieces of his glasses. Glasses he'd worn for 8 years, glasses he'd bought with his first paycheck from this job, glasses that had helped him see clearly enough to read the books that kept him sane during the long, quiet evenings in his apartment. When he looked back up at Derek, his vision was blurry, but his expression was perfectly clear. "That was a mistake," Marcus said quietly. Something in his voice made Derek take an involuntary step backward. The playful cruelty was gone from Derek's face, replaced by the first hint of uncertainty. "What did you say?" Derek asked, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Marcus knelt down and carefully picked up the broken pieces of his glasses, placing them gently in his pocket. When he stood back up, something fundamental had changed in his posture. The slumped shoulders were straight now. The careful, submissive body language was gone. He looked taller. Somehow. "I said that was a mistake," Marcus repeated, his Haitian accent barely noticeable now. "And now we're going to have a conversation about respect." Derek looked around at the watching faces, searching for support, but even Brad and Stephanie had gone quiet. The crowd of employees had grown larger, drawn by the tension in the air. You can't threaten me," Derek stammered. "I'll have you fired. I'll have you arrested." "No threats," Marcus said calmly. "Just a conversation, man to man." He took a step forward, and Derek instinctively took a step back. "See, here's what you don't understand, Derek," Marcus continued, his voice conversational but carrying a weight that made everyone in the lobby pay attention. "You think respect comes from fear, from making people smaller so you can feel bigger. But that's not respect. That's just bullying." Another step forward, another step back from Derek. "Real respect," Marcus said, "comes from understanding, from recognizing the person you're dealing with, and you never bothered to understand who I am." Derek's back hit the wall. Somehow, without anyone noticing exactly when it happened, Marcus had backed him into a corner in front of the entire lobby. Who are you?" Derek asked, and for the first time in anyone's memory, his voice was small. Marcus smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. "My name is Marcus Delacroix," he said clearly. "Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Delacroix, United States Navy SEALs, retired. 15 years of service. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Navy Cross." The lobby was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "I've been shot 7 times, blown up twice, and I've been in more real fights than you could count in your lifetime. I've been trained by the best fighters in the world, and I've trained others who went on to become legends themselves." Derek's face had gone completely pale. "But more importantly," Marcus continued, "I came here looking for peace. I took this job because I wanted to be invisible, to heal, to find some quiet in a world that had been nothing but noise for 15 years. I was perfectly happy to empty your trash and mop your floors and listen to your little comments about my accent and my appearance." He leaned closer, and Derek pressed himself harder against the wall. "But you couldn't leave it alone, could you? You had to keep pushing, had to keep testing, had to break my glasses and make me choose between my peace and my dignity." The entire crowd was watching now, employees from every floor drawn by word, spreading through the building. Sarah was filming with her phone. Even some of the executives had emerged from their offices. "So here's what's going to happen now," Marcus said, his voice carrying easily through the silent lobby. "You're going to apologize. Not just to me, but to everyone who watched you humiliate another human being for sport. You're going to pay for my glasses. And you're going to think very carefully about who you choose to target in the future." Derek's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Brad started to step forward, old linebacker instincts kicking in, but Marcus turned to look at him, and Brad froze mid-step. "I wouldn't," Marcus said simply. "Trust me on this one." Brad looked into Marcus's eyes and saw 15 years of combat, of life-or-death situations, of training that had been paid for in blood and pain. He stepped back. "Now," Marcus said, turning back to Derek, "the apology. I ... Derek's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I apologize. I was out of line." "To everyone," Marcus prompted. Derek looked around at the crowd of faces, all watching him with expressions ranging from disgust to fascination to second-hand embarrassment. "I apologize to everyone," Derek said louder. "My behavior was inappropriate and unprofessional." Marcus nodded. "Better. And you'll remember this conversation the next time you feel like making someone else small to make yourself big." "Yes," Derek whispered. "Good." Marcus stepped back, giving Derek room to breathe. "Now get out of my sight." Derek pushed himself off the wall and hurried toward the elevators, Brad and Stephanie trailing behind him like confused puppies. The crowd began to disperse, employees heading to their desks with excited chatter about what they'd just witnessed. But Sarah remained, approaching Marcus with obvious admiration. "That was incredible," she said. "I had no idea. I mean, Navy SEALs. Really?" Marcus began collecting his cleaning supplies, suddenly looking tired. The adrenaline was wearing off, and he was remembering why he'd wanted to avoid situations like this. "Really," he confirmed. "But I'd prefer if that stayed between us. I came here for the quiet, remember?" "Of course," Sarah said quickly. "But Marcus, why did you let him treat you like that for so long? If you could have stopped it at any time." Marcus paused in his work, considering the question. It was a fair one. "Because once you use violence to solve a problem, it becomes easier to use violence to solve the next problem," he said finally. "I spent 15 years solving problems with violence. I was very good at it. But violence changes you, and not always for the better." He looked up at Sarah, his vision still blurry without his glasses. "I didn't want to be that person anymore. I wanted to see if I could be someone else, someone peaceful. And now," Marcus sighed, "now I remember that sometimes peace has to be defended. Sometimes you have to stand up, not because you want to fight, but because fighting is the only way to stop the fighting." Over the next few days, word of the confrontation spread through Pinnacle Tech like wildfire. The story grew in the telling. Some versions had Marcus physically throwing Derek across the lobby, others had him revealing classified military secrets. But the core truth remained. The quiet janitor wasn't who anyone had thought he was. Derek, meanwhile, had called in sick for 3 consecutive days. When he finally returned to work, he was a different person. Gone was the swaggering confidence, the casual cruelty, the need to make others small. He walked quickly through hallways, avoided eye contact, and spoke in quiet, respectful tones to everyone, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. Brad and Stephanie had their own transformations. Brad, who had built his identity around physical intimidation, found himself questioning every interaction. The knowledge that he'd been casually threatening a man who could have killed him without breaking a sweat left him humbled and more than a little paranoid. Stephanie discovered that her sharp tongue felt less amusing when she remembered that words could have real consequences. But the biggest change was in how others treated Marcus. Employees who had walked past him for months without acknowledgement now nodded respectfully when they passed. Security guards who had barely noticed him before made a point of greeting him by name. Even the executives seemed to see him differently, not as invisible furniture, but as a person with depth and history. Sarah had become something of an ally, often stopping to chat during her coffee breaks. She'd also quietly arranged for the company to pay for Marcus's new glasses, claiming it as a workplace safety expense. "You know," she said one morning as Marcus cleaned the conference room where Derek used to hold court, "people are different now. Not just Derek and his friends, everyone." Marcus adjusted his new glasses and continued wiping down the table. "How so?" "They're more careful," Sarah said. "More aware." "I think seeing what happened to Derek made everyone realize that you never really know who you're talking to, that maybe treating people with basic respect isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Fear can teach respect, but it's not the same as earning it." "But you did earn it," Sarah insisted. "You earned it by being decent for all those months while Derek was being awful. You earned it by only using your strength when you absolutely had to. You earned it by being better than them." A week later, Marcus was surprised to find Derek waiting by his cleaning cart after hours. The building was mostly empty, just security guards and a few late-working programmers. Derek looked nervous, but determined. "I wanted to talk to you," Derek said, "without an audience." Marcus continued organizing his supplies, but nodded for Derek to continue. "I've been thinking about what you said. About respect, about understanding who you're dealing with." Derek paused, struggling with words. "I think I've been dealing with a lot of people badly. Not just you." "Probably," Marcus agreed without judgment. "I don't know how to... I've always been..." Derek trailed off, then started again. "My father was like me. Worse, actually. He taught me that the world was about winners and losers, and if you weren't making someone else lose, then you were the one losing." Marcus stopped what he was doing and looked at Derek directly. "And now? Now I'm thinking maybe he was wrong," Derek said. "Maybe there's another way to be strong." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. "There is," Marcus said finally. "But it's harder. It takes more courage to lift people up than to tear them down." Derek nodded, looking almost relieved to hear it stated so clearly. Could you teach me? I mean, not fighting," he added quickly. "I mean the other thing, the real respect thing." Marcus studied Derek's face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but what he saw was something he'd recognize anywhere. A person who had been broken down and was trying to figure out how to build himself back up into something better. "Maybe," Marcus said, "but it starts with apologizing to everyone you've hurt. Really apologizing, not because you're scared, but because you understand that they deserved better." "There are a lot of people," Derek said quietly. "Then you've got a lot of work to do," Marcus replied. Over the following months, Pinnacle Tech became a different kind of workplace. Derek's transformation wasn't instant or perfect. Old habits died hard, and he stumbled frequently. But each time he caught himself falling into old patterns, he would remember the feeling of being backed against that wall, and he would choose differently. More importantly, other employees began to find their own courage. Seeing that bullies could be stopped, that respect could be earned and demanded, people started speaking up for themselves and others. The culture of casual cruelty that Derek had fostered was replaced by something healthier, something that recognized the dignity in everyone who walked through those doors. Marcus continued his work, still quiet, still unassuming in most ways. But there was a difference in how he carried himself now. The careful invisibility was gone, replaced by a calm confidence. He was still the same man who preferred books to bars, who fed stray cats and read philosophy in 3 languages, but he was no longer hiding from his own strength. Sometimes, late at night as he locked up the building, Marcus would think about the choices he'd made. He'd left the military to escape violence, to find peace. In some ways, he'd failed. That moment in the lobby had required him to tap into the very skills and instincts he'd been trying to leave behind. But in other ways, he'd succeeded beyond his hopes. He'd learned that strength didn't have to mean violence, that power could be used to protect rather than dominate. He'd discovered that sometimes the most peaceful thing you can do is refuse to let cruelty go unchallenged. And on quiet mornings, as he pushed his cart through the empty hallways of Pinnacle Tech, Marcus Delacroix felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've chosen to be exactly who you needed to be, when you needed to be it most. The broken glasses in his desk drawer served as a reminder, not of the moment his peace was shattered, but of the moment he learned that true peace wasn't about hiding from conflict. It was about having the strength to end it.